For 3,000 years, nobody knew the Hittites existed. The Bible mentioned them, brief references. The land of the Hittites, a people, a kingdom. But archaeologists found nothing. No cities, no monuments, no evidence. Some scholars declared the biblical Hittites a myth, a literary invention, fiction. Then, in 1906, archaeologists digging in central Turkey found something. Clay tablets, thousands of them, written in cuneiform, and suddenly an empire reappeared. The discovery at Hattusa. The excavation site was called Boğazkale, in what is now north-central Turkey. Beneath the soil lay ruins, massive fortification walls, palace complexes, temples, administrative buildings, and archives, royal archives containing diplomatic correspondence, law codes, religious texts, military records. This was Hattusa, capital of the Hittite Empire. The excavators realized they'd found something extraordinary, a lost superpower, the scale of the empire. At its peak, around 1350–1200 BC, the Hittite Empire controlled most of Anatolia, modern Turkey, parts of northern Mesopotamia, parts of the Levant, Syria, Lebanon, territory stretching from the Aegean to the Euphrates River. They were one of the great powers of the Bronze Age, alongside Egypt, New Kingdom, Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni. The Hittites weren't a minor kingdom. They were a superpower negotiating with other superpowers as equals. The historical blackout. Here's what's strange. The Hittite Empire lasted roughly 500 years, 1650 to 1180 BC. They fought wars with Egypt, made treaties, conducted diplomacy across the ancient Near East. Egyptian records mention them. Babylonian texts reference them. Assyrian sources acknowledge them. Yet by 1000 BC, barely 200 years after their collapse, they were essentially forgotten. Greek historians writing centuries later had no knowledge of them. Roman scholars didn't know they existed. Medieval historians had only biblical fragments. A 500-year superpower vanished so completely that modern scholars thought they were fictional. The Hittites possessed a technology that made them dominant: iron. Around 1400 BC, they figured out how to smelt and work iron reliably. This was revolutionary. Bronze, the standard metal of the age, required copper and tin. Tin was rare, trade-dependent, expensive. Iron ore was common, available locally. And iron weapons were harder than bronze, held edges longer, were more durable in battle. The Hittites kept ironworking secret, a state monopoly. For centuries, they were the only civilization with reliable iron weapons. This gave them a decisive military edge. The Hittites revolutionized chariot warfare. Earlier civilizations used chariots as transport or status symbols. The Hittites weaponized them. Their chariots carried 3 people: driver, shield-bearer, archer with composite bow-mast formations. Coordinated attacks, combined arms tactics integrating chariots with infantry. Against traditional Bronze Age armies, Hittite chariot forces were devastating. In 1274 BC, the Hittites fought Egypt at the Battle of Kadesh. Ramesses II, Egypt versus Muwatalli II, Hittites, the largest chariot battle in recorded history. Estimates suggest 5,000 to 6,000 chariots total. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides suffered heavy casualties. The result, a peace treaty. The Treaty of Kadesh, one of the earliest written international agreements in history. 2 superpowers negotiating as equals, defining borders, agreeing to mutual defense. This wasn't tribal warfare, this was geopolitics. Unlike some ancient civilizations, the Hittites left extensive written records. Cuneiform tablets, thousands of them. We can read their laws, their diplomatic correspondence, their religious rituals, their military orders, their royal proclamations. We know their kings' names, their gods, their political structure. We have their voices, their thoughts, their world view. Yet they still disappeared. How does a superpower, with advanced technology, organized military, extensive written records, vanish so completely that scholars think it's fictional. What happened around 1200 BC that destroyed not just the Hittites, but multiple civilizations simultaneously? Why did the Bronze Age end in catastrophe across the entire Mediterranean and Near East? And why did it take 3,000 years for us to even realize they existed? Around 1400 BC, the Hittites discovered something that would dominate warfare for the next 1,000 years. Iron. Not just iron ore. Everyone knew iron existed. But the secret of smelting it reliably, consistently, at scale. The bronze problem. Bronze Age civilizations depended on bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Copper was relatively common. Tin was rare. Tin sources were limited. Distant, trade dependent. To maintain bronze production, you needed extensive trade networks, control of tin sources, vulnerability to supply disruption. If your tin supply was cut, your military capacity collapsed. The iron advantage. Iron ore was everywhere. Available locally in most regions. No long-distance trade required. But smelting iron is harder than smelting bronze. Iron's melting point is higher, 1538 degree versus 950, 1000 degree SE for bronze. Early ironworking produced brittle, inconsistent metal. Worse than bronze, the Hittites solved this problem. The carburization secret. The Hittites figured out carburization, adding carbon to iron during heating. This process creates steel, iron-carbon alloy, which is harder than bronze, holds edges better, more durable, more resistant to corrosion. The exact process was a closely guarded state secret. Hittite law forbade export of iron-working knowledge. Penalty: death, the strategic monopoly. For roughly 200 years, the Hittites were the only civilization with reliable iron weapons. This gave them superior armor, superior weapons, psychological advantage, enemies facing magical metal. Iron weapons could shatter bronze swords, pierce bronze armor, break bronze shields. In close combat, Hittite soldiers had decisive advantage: the limited availability. Hittite iron wasn't mass-produced initially. It was expensive, reserved for elite warriors, royal guards, diplomatic gifts. A Hittite king gifting an iron dagger to an ally was a supreme gesture, not because of the metal's value, but because of what it represented: access to cutting-edge military technology. The correspondence. Hittite diplomatic letters reveal requests for iron from other kingdoms. Egyptian pharaohs asking for iron tools. Assyrian kings requesting iron weapons. The Hittites sometimes complied, sending small amounts, but never the knowledge of how to make it. One letter from a Hittite king to a foreign ruler essentially says, "Iron is not available right now. It's a bad time for making iron." Translation: "We're keeping this secret. Stop asking." Yuan, the technology transfer problem. Eventually, the secret leaked. By 1200 BC, other civilizations began producing iron. How the knowledge spread. Captured Hittite smiths. Defectors revealing techniques. Trade espionage. Independent discovery elsewhere. Once ironworking became widespread, the Hittite advantage evaporated. The timing. The loss of iron monopoly coincided with Hittite decline. Around 1200 BC, ironworking spread to multiple civilizations. Hittite military dominance weakened. Other powers closed the technology gap. Was this coincidence, or did loss of advantage contribute to collapse? The irony. The Hittites helped trigger the Iron Age, the period when iron replaced bronze as the primary metal. They pioneered the technology, hoarded it, monopolized it, then lost control of it just as their empire was collapsing. The Iron Age they created continued, but they didn't survive to dominate it. The archaeological evidence. Hittite sites contain iron artifacts, weapons, tools, jewelry, ceremonial objects. Some show sophisticated craftsmanship. Others are crude, suggesting early experiments. The progression is visible, from rare, exotic luxury to increasingly common production. Then, around 1200 BC, production stops. The sites are abandoned. The forges go cold. The iron monopoly that made the Hittites untouchable becomes irrelevant when the civilization itself collapses. The Hittites didn't invent the chariot. They revolutionized it. They took what was essentially a luxury vehicle and turned it into the ancient equivalent of a main battle tank. The early chariots. Before the Hittites, chariots were used by Egyptians, light, two-wheeled, two-person, driver plus archer, Mesopotamians, heavier, slower, primarily for transport. These were battlefield taxis. They delivered commanders to combat, provided mobility, intimidated infantry. But they weren't decisive weapons. The Hittite innovation. The Hittites redesigned the chariot from the ground up. Crew, 3 people instead of 2, driver, controlling the horses, shield bearer, protecting the archer, archer, equipped with composite bow. Construction, heavier frame for stability, larger wheels for rough terrain, reinforced axles for combat stress. Tactics, massed formations charging in waves, coordinated attacks with infantry support, flanking maneuvers, pursuit of broken enemy formations. This was combined arms warfare, centuries before the term existed. The composite bow advantage. The Hittite archer carried a composite bow, made from wood, horn, and sinew laminated together. Composite bows generated more power than simple bows, shot arrows farther, penetrated armor better, were effective at range and close quarters. From a moving chariot, a skilled archer could fire arrows while advancing, maintain accuracy at speed, suppress enemy formations, create devastating psychological impact. Chariot warfare required extensive training. Drivers needed to control horses at high speed across rough terrain. Shield bearers needed to balance while protecting the archer. Archers needed to shoot accurately from a moving platform. All 3 needed to coordinate seamlessly. This wasn't improvised. This was professional military specialization. The Hittites maintained a standing chariot corps, elite units trained from youth. Hittite chariot formations were designed for shock, massed charge, hundreds of chariots advancing simultaneously. The goal: break enemy formations through sheer impact, create gaps for infantry to exploit, cause psychological collapse, pursue and destroy fleeing enemies. Infantry armies facing Hittite chariots had limited options: stand and be overrun, flee and be cut down, fight and hope for terrain advantage. The Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BC, showcased Hittite chariot doctrine at its peak. Hittite forces ambushed Egyptian columns, used terrain for concealment, coordinated multi-directional attacks. The Egyptian army nearly collapsed. Only desperate fighting and reinforcements saved them. Both sides claimed victory. But the Hittites demonstrated that their chariot tactics could challenge the largest army in the Bronze Age world. Hittite doctrine didn't rely solely on chariots. They integrated heavy infantry, spearmen, light infantry, skirmishers, archers, chariots. Each element supported the others. Chariots broke enemy lines, infantry exploited gaps, archers suppressed counterattacks, light infantry pursued fleeing enemies. This is modern military thinking. Applied 300 years ago, chariot warfare was expensive. Each chariot required 2 trained horses, wooden construction materials, metal fittings and weapons, 3 trained crew members, ongoing maintenance. A chariot corps of 2,000 vehicles, typical for major battles, required 4,000 horses, 6,000 trained personnel, massive logistical support, extensive infrastructure. Only wealthy, organized states could field such forces. The Hittites built an empire on their ability to do this better than anyone else. Other civilizations adapted. Egypt improved their chariot designs. Assyria developed heavier armored chariots. Smaller kingdoms copied tactics. By the 1200 BC, chariot warfare had spread throughout the Near East and Mediterranean. The Hittite advantage eroded. Everyone now had similar capabilities. The Hittites invented doctrines that would dominate warfare for millennia. Combined arms integration, shock tactics, mobility advantage, professional military specialization. When their empire collapsed, the tactics survived. Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, all would use variations of combined arms warfare. The Hittites pioneered the model, but they didn't survive to perfect it. Around 1200 BC, something catastrophic happened. Not in one place, everywhere, across the Mediterranean, across the Near East, across multiple civilizations simultaneously. Within roughly 100 years, the Hittite Empire collapsed completely, Mycenaean Greece disintegrated, the Egyptian New Kingdom declined drastically, numerous Levantine cities were destroyed, trade networks collapsed, writing systems disappeared, populations declined dramatically. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. It's one of the greatest mysteries in archaeology. The scale of destruction. Archaeological evidence shows widespread destruction around 1200 BC. Hattusa, Hittite capital, burned and abandoned Mycenae, Greece, destroyed Tiryns, Greece, destroyed Pylos, Greece, destroyed Troy, Anatolia, destroyed Troy, Savannah, Ugarit, Syria, destroyed and never rebuilt Megiddo, Levant, destroyed Hazor, Levant, destroyed Lachish, Levant, destroyed. The destruction layer appears in dozens of sites across a 1,000-mile radius. Approximately the same time period, roughly 1200–1150 BC. The symptom list. What followed the collapse? Population declined by 50–90% in some regions. Cities abandoned. Long-distance trade ceased. Writing disappeared in some areas. Greece lost literacy for 400 years, the Dark Age. Monumental construction stopped. Centralized governments collapsed. Technological regression. This wasn't just political change. This was civilizational breakdown. The Sea Peoples. Egyptian records mention mysterious invaders called the Sea Peoples. Rameses III, around 1177 BC, fought them off. Egyptian temples show reliefs of battles against these invaders. The Sea Peoples are described as coming from the islands and northern lands, traveling by sea and land, destroying cities, displacing populations. Egyptian records list names: Peliset, Cheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, Weshesh. Some scholars identify these groups as Philistines, Peliset, Sicilians, Shekelesh, Greeks or Anatolians, others. But we don't really know who they were, or where they came from, or what motivated them. The systems collapse. Theory. Many historians now believe the Sea Peoples weren't the cause, they were a symptom. The theory. Interconnected Bronze Age civilizations depended on each other for tin supplies for bronze, food surplus for trade, political stability, security guarantees. When one part failed, the whole system cascaded. Drought weakens food supplies, famine causes migrations, migrations disrupt trade, trade collapse cripples bronze production, military capacity weakens, weakened states can't defend against raiders, raiders become Sea Peoples. More states collapse, system failure accelerates a domino effect, each collapse triggering the next. The climate evidence. Paleoclimate studies show drought around 1200 BC. Tree ring data, pollen analysis, sediment cores. The Eastern Mediterranean experienced reduced rainfall, lower crop yields, stress on agricultural systems. Bronze Age civilizations depended on agricultural surplus. Drought meant less food, less tax revenue, less ability to support armies, less ability to maintain infrastructure. Already stressed systems couldn't handle the shock. The earthquake hypothesis. Some scholars propose earthquake storms, a series of major earthquakes over decades. Evidence: destruction layers showing earthquake damage, collapsed walls with characteristic earthquake fractures, multiple sites damaged around the same time. The Eastern Mediterranean is seismically active. A cluster of major earthquakes could destroy cities, disrupt agriculture, damage ports and trade infrastructure, trigger migrations as populations fled damaged regions. The multi-causal reality. The truth is probably all of the above. Drought, plus earthquakes, plus systems, collapse, plus migrations, plus warfare, catastrophe. No single cause, but multiple stresses hitting simultaneously. Bronze Age civilizations were sophisticated but fragile, interconnected but vulnerable. When the system broke, it broke everywhere. The Hittite specifics. For the Hittites, collapse was especially complete. Hattusa was burned around 1180 BC. The archives stop, the bureaucracy disappears. The empire fragments. Within a generation, the Hittite state ceased to exist. Some cities in the south survived briefly as Neo-Hittite kingdoms, but these were remnants, not continuations. By 1000 BC, the Hittite Empire was memory. The Dark Age. The centuries following collapse, 1200 and 800 BC, are called the Dark Age, not because life ended, but because writing disappeared in many regions, trade declined, populations were smaller, no monumental architecture, less archaeological evidence. The survivors, not everyone collapsed. Egypt survived, weakened. Assyria survived, eventually rebuilt. Phoenician coastal cities survived and thrived. Inland regions survived in reduced form. The survivors were either geographically protected, less dependent on interconnected systems, able to adapt quickly. The Hittites, deeply integrated into Bronze Age systems, couldn't adapt fast enough. The Hittite Empire collapsed around 1180 BC. By 1000 BC, barely 180 years later, they were essentially forgotten, their cities abandoned, their language unread, their history unknown. How does a 500-year superpower vanish from memory that quickly? The writing problem. The Hittites wrote in cuneiform, borrowed from Mesopotamia. Cuneiform required. Trained scribes. Institutional support. Continuous tradition. Clay tablets and archives. When the Hittite state collapsed, scribal schools closed, archives were abandoned. No one trained new scribes. The writing tradition died. Within a generation or two, no one could read cuneiform in former Hittite territory. The tablets remained, but they became meaningless symbols. The language death. Hittite was an Indo-European language, related to Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, but it was spoken only in Anatolia. It had no widespread use outside the empire. When the empire fell, populations dispersed. New groups moved in: Phrygians, Lydians, Greeks. Hittite speakers assimilated. The language fragmented and died. By 800 BC, Hittite was probably extinct as a living language. The city abandonment. Hattusa, the capital, was burned and abandoned around 1180 BC. Unlike some ancient cities that were rebuilt after destruction, Hattusa was never reoccupied. The site was too remote, too damaged, no longer strategically valuable. It sat empty for 3,000 years until archaeologists found it in the 20th century. Other Hittite cities either were destroyed and abandoned, were taken over by new populations who didn't know their history, declined to small settlements with no memory of their former glory. The Neo-Hittite fragments. In southern Anatolia and northern Syria, some Neo-Hittite kingdoms survived for a few centuries. These were cultural remnants, using Hittite art styles, some Hittite traditions. But they didn't maintain the imperial identity, used different languages, Luwian, Aramaic, were politically fragmented, eventually were conquered by Assyrians, 8th century BC. By 700 BC, even these fragments were gone. The Assyrian amnesia. Assyrian records from 800 to 700 BC mention conquering cities in former Hittite territory, but they don't mention Hittites. They reference small kingdoms, Carchemish, Tabal, others. No recognition that these were remnants of the empire that had once negotiated with Assyria as an equal. The Hittite identity was already erased from regional memory. When Greeks began colonizing Anatolia around 800 BC onward, they encountered ruins, empty cities, no population claiming Hittite heritage. Greek historians, Herodotus, Thucydides, others, mention various Anatolian peoples, Lydians, Phrygians, Carians. No mention of Hittites. The Greeks had no idea a major empire had existed there 400 years earlier. The only place the Hittite name survived was in the Hebrew Bible. References to the land of the Hittites, Hittite individuals, Hittite territory. But these references are brief, vague, mixed with other peoples. Biblical scholars reading these passages in later centuries had no archaeological evidence the Hittites existed. Some concluded they were mythical, a biblical invention. In the 1800s, scholars debated whether the Hittites were real. The Bible mentioned them, but no ancient historians confirmed them. No ruins were identified, no inscriptions found. Skeptics argued, if they were such a great empire, where's the evidence? The evidence was buried under 3,000 years of soil in central Anatolia. When archaeologists found Hattusa and began translating tablets, the scholarly world was shocked. Not only were the Hittites real, they were a superpower, one that had negotiated with Egypt, fought Rameses II to a standstill, controlled half of Anatolia, and somehow nobody remembered them. Imagine if Rome collapsed in 400 AD, which it did, and by 600 AD, 200 years later, no one remembered Rome existed. No one could read Latin. No one knew Roman history. Roman identity was completely erased. That's approximately what happened to the Hittites. Except Rome had successors, Byzantium, the Catholic Church, that preserved memory. The Hittites had no successors, no continuity, no one to carry the memory forward. The Hittite erasure shows how quickly civilization can be forgotten. 1180 BC. Empire collapses, 1100 BC. Writing tradition dead, 1000 BC. Language probably extinct, 800 BC. Identity erased from regional memory. 700 BC. Even remnant kingdoms absorbed, 400 BC. Greek historians unaware they existed, 1800s. AD. Modern scholars debate if they were real. 1906 AD. Empire rediscovered 180 years from superpower to forgotten. If the Hittites, with their extensive written records, their monumental architecture, their diplomatic correspondence preserved in multiple empires, could be forgotten, what makes us think we're immune? The Hittites weren't just warriors. They were lawmakers, bureaucrats, record keepers. They created one of the ancient world's most sophisticated legal systems. And unlike their military conquests, their legal legacy actually survived, influencing civilizations that followed. The law codes. Hittite archives contain extensive law codes, hundreds of laws covering property rights, marriage and divorce, inheritance, theft and damages, murder and assault, contract enforcement, slavery regulations, agricultural disputes. These aren't crude eye for an eye systems. They're nuanced, detailed, showing sophisticated legal thinking. The principle of proportionality. Hittite law emphasized proportional punishment, not same injury for same injury, but appropriate compensation for harm done. Example: if you accidentally kill someone's slave, you pay the owner compensation equal to the slave's value. If you deliberately kill someone's slave, you pay double. If you kill a free person, punishment is more severe. The system recognized intent accident versus deliberate, status, slave versus free person, context, circumstances matter. This is sophisticated jurisprudence. The treatment of women. Hittite law gave women more rights than many ancient systems. Women could own property, could initiate divorce under certain circumstances, could inherit from parents, had legal standing in courts, could conduct business transactions, not equality by modern standards. But relatively progressive for 1400 BC. Hittite tablets preserve business contracts, land sales, loan agreements, trade partnerships, service contracts. These show witnesses required for validity, written documentation standard, enforcement mechanisms, dispute resolution procedures. The Hittites were running a contract-based economy 3,400 years ago. The Treaty of Kadesh, 1259 BC, between the Hittites and Egypt is remarkable. It's one of the earliest surviving international agreements. It includes defined borders, mutual defense clauses, extradition agreements, trade protections, dispute resolution mechanisms. This is modern treaty structure. In the 13th century BC, Hittite law showed unusual religious tolerance for the ancient world. The empire contained Hittite indigenous religion, Hurrian gods from subject peoples, Mesopotamian deities, Anatolian local cults. Hittite kings didn't force religious uniformity. They absorbed foreign gods into their pantheon, respected local religious practices, used religion as diplomatic tool, adopting allied gods. This pragmatic tolerance helped maintain a multi-ethnic empire. Beyond laws, Hittite archives contain massive administrative records, tax collection records, military supply lists, agricultural production reports, diplomatic correspondence, royal decrees, census data. This shows centralized bureaucracy, organized record-keeping, systematic governance, institutional memory. The Hittites ran a state, not just a kingdom. Hittite diplomatic correspondence reveals sophisticated protocols, formal greetings based on relative status, gift exchange expectations, marriage alliance negotiations, complaint procedures for treaty violations. Letters between Hittite kings and foreign rulers read like modern diplomatic communication. Formal proceduraux. Careful about status and protocol. When the Hittite Empire collapsed, some legal concepts survived. Assyrian law codes show Hittite influence. Biblical law, in some scholars' view, reflects Hittite legal thinking. Later Anatolian peoples preserved some legal traditions. The empire died, but the idea that law should be written down, applied systematically, balanced in punishment, accessible to subjects. These ideas persisted. When archaeologists translated Hittite legal texts, they were surprised. Ancient empires were supposed to be brutal, arbitrary, tyrannical. The Hittite laws showed reasonableness, proportionality, concern for fairness, systematic thinking. This forced revision of how we understand Bronze Age civilization. The Hittites weren't primitive, they were sophisticated. They built a legal system that wouldn't be out of place in the medieval period, 2,000 years before the medieval period. Historians have been studying the Bronze Age collapse for decades, and we still don't have a definitive answer. The Sea Peoples revisited. Egyptian records clearly show invasion. Ramesses III fought foreign fleets and armies. But who were they really? Theories. Displaced populations from collapsed states, pirates taking advantage of chaos, organized military invasions from the north, refugees seeking new homes, mercenaries whose employers vanished. Some combination of all these. The problem: we only have Egyptian perspective. The Sea Peoples left no written records, no archaeological signature clearly identifying them. We know they existed because Egypt said so. We don't know who they were. The climate hypothesis. Drought around 1200 BC is well established. But did it cause collapse? Or did it just destabilize already fragile systems? Questions without answers. How severe was the drought exactly? How long did it last? Which regions were affected most? Did it cause mass starvation? Or just agricultural stress? Climate alone probably wasn't enough to destroy multiple empires. But combined with other stresses, it was a contributing factor. The earthquake theory. Seismic evidence shows destruction layers, but evidence is contradictory. Some destruction looks like earthquake damage. Other destruction looks like fire from warfare. Some sites show both. Did earthquakes trigger migration? Did migration cause warfare? Or did they happen independently? The system's collapse model. The most plausible theory: interconnected civilizations depending on each other for grain. Egypt exported grain. Tin for bronze. Timber from Lebanon. Other strategic materials. If one part breaks, the system cascades. Failed harvest, grain shortage, economic disruption, military weakness, invasion, vulnerability, invasion, collapse, migration, more invasions, more collapses, a domino effect spreading across the Mediterranean. This model is compelling because it explains the simultaneous collapse across multiple regions, the different causes at different sites, the rapid spread of destruction, the difficulty in identifying any single cause. The perfect storm scenario. The most likely truth: everything happened at once. Drought plus earthquakes plus systems disruption plus migration plus warfare plus disease cause collapse. No single cause, but multiple stresses hitting simultaneously. Bronze Age civilizations were sophisticated but fragile, too interconnected, too dependent on specific materials. When multiple systems broke at once, recovery was impossible. What we know about the Hittites. For the Hittites specifically, Hattusa was burned around 1180 BC. The city was never rebuilt. The empire fragmented. No evidence of reconquest or rebuilding, whether this was external invasion, internal rebellion, earthquake damage, economic collapse. Some combination, we don't know for certain. The unanswered questions. Even after decades of study. Who exactly were the Sea Peoples? Where did they come from? Were they organized or desperate refugees? Did they destroy civilization or take advantage of collapse? How much was drought responsible? How many earthquakes occurred? How many people died? Did plague play a role? We have no evidence. Could a single catastrophe explain everything? For each question, historians have theories, but not proof. The evidence limits. The problem: we only have archaeological remains, surviving Egyptian records, fragmentary Hittite tablets, biblical references, written centuries later, no records from the Sea Peoples, no comprehensive climate data, limited seismic records. We're reconstructing a global collapse from fragments, like trying to understand World War II from ruins alone, with no written records surviving. It's an incomplete picture. The lesson: the Bronze Age collapse shows something important. Advanced civilizations can collapse for reasons that are partly unknowable. We study the Hittites, we read their records, we understand their society, yet we can't explain why they disappeared. They couldn't prevent it. They couldn't adapt. They couldn't escape. Within a generation, a 500-year superpower was gone, and we're still arguing about why. The Hittites rose from nomadic peoples to superpower in a few centuries. They dominated their world, wrote the rules, made treaties as equals with Egypt. Then they disappeared. Within 200 years, forgotten. Within 3,000 years, thought to be mythical. What does this mean for us? The technological confidence trap. The Hittites had advanced weapons, iron, sophisticated military, combined arms tactics, complex bureaucracy, legal codes, records, established trade networks, monumental architecture, written records, diplomatic protocols. They were the most advanced civilization in their region, and it didn't save them. We have nuclear weapons, digital networks, satellite communications, instant global trade, massive archives, supercomputers, and we assume this makes us immune to collapse. The Hittites probably assumed the same. The fragility of interconnection. The Bronze Age was interconnected. Trade routes linked civilizations, tin from one region to another, grain from Egypt fed neighboring peoples. Bronze production required coordination. One break cascaded through the system. Sound familiar? Our modern world is far more interconnected. Supply chains spanning continents, digital networks vulnerable to single points of failure, financial systems interdependent, just-in-time supply logistics, power grids requiring constant coordination. If Bronze Age interconnection created fragility, what about ours? The Hittites had knowledge, ironworking, chariot tactics, legal codes, engineering. But when the civilization collapsed, scribal traditions died, apprenticeships ended, institutions dissolved, knowledge was lost. We store knowledge differently. Digital formats dependent on electricity, databases requiring ongoing maintenance, languages assuming modern context, institutions dependent on stable societies. If a major collapse happened, how much knowledge would survive 100 years without power? How much would survive 500 years? How much would survive 3,000 years? The Hittites preserved some knowledge in stone. We preserve most in ephemeral electronics. What took only 200 years? A superpower to forgotten, a language to dead, an identity to erased, a history to mythologized. In 200 years from now, 2225 AD, what will be remembered about us? Will our accomplishments be celebrated, studied, misunderstood, completely forgotten? The Hittites fit a pattern we see repeatedly. Rome, superpower, collapse, Dark Ages, forgotten, Maya, advanced civilization, collapse, ruins, mystery, Cahokia, megacity, abandoned, invisible, Gunung Padang, possibly ancient construction, unsure of its builders. Pattern, advanced civilization. Plus, so stress. Plus, fragility. Rapid collapse. Forgetting. How many times does this pattern have to repeat before we notice? The Hittites couldn't control. Drought, climate, earthquakes, geology, migration, demography, trade route shifts, economics, external invasions, geopolitics. They were subject to forces larger than themselves. We think our technology gives us control over such forces. Does it? Or does it just give us the illusion of control? The Hittites built for military dominance, trade prosperity, monumental legacy, institutional permanence. They didn't build for system disruption, rapid adaptation, decentralized governance, knowledge preservation across collapse. Modern societies build for similar things. Same vulnerabilities. The Hittites speak to us through ruins, fragmentary records, tablets we struggle to interpret, reconstructions that might be wrong. We don't hear their voices, don't know their fears, don't understand what they thought would save them. In 3,000 years, future people will find our ruins. Will they understand us? Or will they, like us with the Hittites, fill the gaps with speculation? The Hittites were smart, organized, advanced, aware that civilizations could fall. They read histories of earlier Mesopotamian collapses. They still couldn't prevent it. What makes us think we can? The Bronze Age collapse suggests something unsettling. Advanced civilizations are fragile. Interconnection creates vulnerability. Knowledge can be lost quickly. Collapse can be sudden, and once it starts, recovery is slow. The Hittites show us the pattern. Are we paying attention? Or are we just the next chapter of the same story, destined to become mysterious ruins, forgotten within a few centuries, mythologized by those who come after?